Ninian Falkiner, your association with the college has lasted for over 40 years, both as a boy and as a teacher. And you served as a boy and a teacher under 3 wardens, Argyle, Macy and Gibbs. Could you give us some impressions of those 3 men?
Well, first, of course, of Warden Argyle, and my first thought of Warden Argyle is fairness, that we boys trusted him. He was, in a way, quite detached from us. He was quite Olympian. We knew we were safe with him. He was also a person who was, I think, very modest. His wardenship, he, I think, shared power. Some might say that Willis and White controlled Warden Argyle. I think they are wrong. So that far, a man of great fairness and of modesty. He was very dignified. He was greatly respected by the teaching staff, and I know this from records I've read, pieces written by a former sub-warden, that he was held, Warden Argyle, in very high regard by them. No doubt it helped that Warden Argyle's predecessor, Warden Sobey, had been controversial and that there had been crises. Warden Argyle's time, in contrast, was marked by stability, continuity, a sense of certainty and of safety. He was a very good administrator. Things worked efficiently. He was considerate and kind. I remember once as a small boy going to his study to ask him about a school expedition that might be taking place. And it was quite a nerve-wracking experience to go to his study, even for that sort of thing. But his kindness and patience I remembered. He was very even-tempered as a warden. Though in contrast, he was not, a pleasant person to be taught by. Rather strange contrast. In a classroom, he had us terrified.
What did he teach?
He taught Latin, and he taught it, I think, efficiently, but he was very patient with us, and we were small people, age 13 or so. However, I don't want to labour that point. I'm much more, it is his fairness, his modesty, which I remember so clearly. Although he was a highly educated person, and I think had been at least a sound classicist, right? I never think of him as being particularly scholarly. I don't mean by that he was careless about learning, and he certainly cultivated learning in others, but I don't think that inside himself that he was driven by a particular love of learning. His sermons in chapel were notable for their dreariness, and he himself would come out of chapel after matins laughing cheerfully about just how dreary his sermon had been. These remarks made to members of staff, and I later knew him as a member of staff myself. So I think I've said as much as I want to say about Warden Argyle.
Well, I would have been there in the transition because I came in his last year, and I remember when David Gibbs came as warden, and what a huge wind of change blew. I mean, What is your recollection of that time, and did you, like me, maybe find it very strange and difficult to get used to at first?
The arrival of Warden Gibbs in 1974 was really remarkable. You, John, had been in the staff for a year or two, I think 1 year, and I'd been in the staff for 4 years. Remarkable, Warden Gibbs's arrival, something of an understatement. David Gibbs is a complex man. He's very intelligent, very single-minded when focusing on the particular issue that he was addressing. A rather overused word comes to mind about David Gibbs, Victorian. And I mean Victorian in the way of his extraordinary strengths, of his sense of certainty. These strengths which, as with great Victorians, could at times be a source of weakness as well. David Gibbs was very intelligent. I think I've already said that. He's very perceptive. He's very impatient. He was certainly in his early years very demanding and sometimes very tough on his staff. He was for a time quite controversial.
In what area?
In his, I think, handling of the pupils with whom he was often impatient. He was a person who was driven by a moral agenda, and I think that was part of his impatience. David Gibbs was hostile, very critical of the permissive 60s, and like the great Victorian, which I think he was, he believed that he could, in this small community, St. Columba's, change that. That he could bring what was lacking so much in society outside the school, he could bring into this community a moral agenda. And in some ways this is admirable because, of course, it supposes that each person was responsible, right, for himself, herself, decisions, and was answerable for them. I think there was certain, I do think that Warden Gibbs in the later 1980s mellowed considerably. I know that he became a very good friend of members of staff. If I may say of myself, a member of staff who had been privately quite critical of him, and I grew to become very, very fond of him, and I do continue to admire him greatly. I think David Gibbs was always disappointed that the college's financial resources were pretty thin, pretty scarce. The college was run in those years successfully from the financial point of view, but resources were few. And I think that a remarkable, a notable thing about his time as warden is that no single important building went up. I think that is accurate. But he improvised. The college numbers increased greatly in his time, and I do think it must have been a disappointment to him that he couldn't have put up some fine building or set of buildings. However, I've often thought that it is the absence of buildings right? And the importance of the person which defines David Gibbs. There's something quite telling in the absence of buildings, because it makes us focus more on the very, very remarkable man that he is, and warden that he was. Of Warden Macy, 1988. And I think as remarkable as the change had been in 1974, when Warden Gibbs came, it was equally remarkable when Warden Macy came in 1988. Here was a person with a deep love of the college, an old Columban.
The first old Columban.
And the first old Columban warden. He was a person of consultation, consensus. I think he was those things by temperament, and to some extent also the Quaker influence from Newtown School. I often think the building of the library illustrates these great qualities of Tim Macy. The way the staff was brought into the whole process of deciding what building should go up, and then to all the details of the library. When I go into the library today, a building like many, I love it very much. I think of Tim Macy and those qualities I've just mentioned. Tim Macy could be, one could see him at his very best, as former Sub-Warden Bud McMullen has said, at assembly. He often conducted assembly in a way which may not have been much to a more traditionalist taste, such as my own, but he did get across what he wanted to say, and what he said was done effectively and sympathetically. I also remember his sermons, quite remarkable for a layman that he should preach in chapel, and he did. And his sermons were deeply revealing, I think, of a sensitive person, intelligent, of course, and also, I think, of Tim Macy, a romantic. Tim, one of his strengths was that he looked for the very best in people. His patience with pupils was almost boundless. On a couple of occasions, I think it may have been too generous. I think there are some young old Columbans out there who, they may not know it fully themselves, owe a great deal to Tim Macy's patience. He was equally patient, I think, with his staff, right? He allowed a great deal of discussion. He allowed opinions to be aired, almost to a point where perhaps things should have been shortened. He's a person, I said, he's a romantic, he's an enthusiast, right? He was a good teacher. I think that is the case. I was never in his classroom. A teacher of skill, he had a love of his subject, and a considerable sportsman. So that of Tim Macy. Toward the end, he was, like most of us, tired. He had a remarkable record of buildings put up in his time. I've indicated earlier that I perhaps don't attach terribly much importance to that, but it's worth saying for the record. Like Argyle, like Gibbs, Macy was a Christian, and speaking for myself as not a convinced Christian, I am struck by these three remarkable wardens, right? Each, I think, driven by religious faith.
Having given us a very interesting look at the way you see the wardens, I'd like to turn a little bit more to you. And you emphasise quite rightly the revolution that came with each one of them. But what, in your view, and coming back here today, what is permanent and what hasn't changed about the college in the midst of the 40 years of change and development that you've seen?
I think you know, John, I find this the hardest question.
Yes.
And the answer, my first answer, is not remarkable. It is chapel. Chapel as a building, as an institution. Years and years ago, I remember Sub-Warden White, in his final address before leaving the college to convention, talking about the importance of chapel and the members of staff must attend. In those days, I was one of the members of staff who didn't attend.
I remember. I also remember you, they were the first minutes I heard, and I remember you scoffing at the idea.
Well, I'm glad you've used the word scoffing, because as the years went by, when I went out of, because I became a housemaster, and then I went increasingly because I do believe that the chapel is central to this place as a community. And I say that as a not very convinced Christian. The chapel is a constant statement, right? The building itself, right, standing there, another statement.
In terms of outside of chapel, in terms of attitudes, relationships, atmosphere, what you felt going into the dining hall today to have lunch, what is there that you see that's still there maybe from the time when you were in a much smaller school as a pupil, an all-boys school?
Well, again, I don't have anything remarkable to say, but I am very struck by the cheerfulness and friendliness of the pupils. And that's underlined when I've left the college now a year and a half. When I came into the dining hall today, that's what struck me.
You talked about maybe a change in your attitude to chapel coming about when you started housemastering. How did your time as a housemaster, 17 years as housemaster of Stackallan, how did that affect the way you related to pupils? Clearly there was a whole new dimension from what there is in the classroom.
When I look back on 17 years of house-mastering, I feel mainly a sense of having had a very happy, contented job. But I regret that, given my temperament, that at least at times, and I hope it wasn't more than just at times, house-mastering might have made me over-severe, a little bit less smiling than I ought to have been. So that would be a regret about, a thing I noticed, right, and perhaps became more accentuated over the years, that perhaps an over-severity.
Do you think that there is an ideal temperament for being a housemaster? Or do you think it's important that housemasters and housemistresses be different and that their houses might indeed have different identities which might flow from a housemaster or housemistress?
There may be, though I doubted, some ideal temperament to be a housemaster. What is certain is that each person appointed is different, and they cannot disguise what they are.
And how much, as a housemaster and a teacher, did you take what you are from the people that have been your teachers and your housemaster?
A great deal. I was fortunate when I was a pupil here to have a remarkable housemaster, Sandham Willis, to be taught by some very, very fine teachers. It is why I came back here to work. I loved the college when I was here as a pupil.
And did you ever think that you might be back teaching here?
No, it never crossed my mind for a moment.
How did it happen?
I had spent 2 years in West Africa teaching, and at the end of 2 years, I realized that I wanted to be a teacher and a schoolmaster.
What made you realize that?
I do not know.
Okay, I'll put it another way. Are you happy?
Oh, sorry, I do know. I simply loved those 2 years working as a teacher and a schoolmaster in West Africa.
So you'd agree, as maybe I have, that a teacher will know almost as soon as they start doing it whether they're suited for it and whether they're going to love it or not.
Oh, yes, I think so. Yes.
What was the most difficult thing for you as a housemaster, the most difficult occasions, the most difficult times? You've said rightly that it was, in general, a very happy time. What was difficult?
Well, I'd like to emphasize the happiness of it.
Yeah.
I'd like to, I remember saying at the time, I'd get out of bed in the morning, sleeves rolled up, looking forward to the day.
Yeah.
So if I have commented already on my slight regret about times being very severe, it's, I loved nearly all the years that I was a housemaster. But what was the most difficult thing? Easily the most difficult thing was in later years dealing with those suspected of taking drugs. Because you had to get to the truth. And to get to the truth, you had to, if you were convinced that a person had been taking drugs, for the good of the college, or this is how I read it, right, you had to pretty well break them in an interview. That is easily the toughest, the hardest, the most distasteful part of the job that I had.
And what was the best part?
The best part was friendships. The best part was, certainly in some years, was going into the house common room on a Sunday evening after chapel and just munching toast with them.
There have only been 2 senior masters so far in the history of the college, yourself and myself, which leads me to talk about staff. I mean, what are your memories of the staff that you worked with? You've talked about your relationships and friendships with the pupils.
Well, as a pupil and working here for over 30 years, I'm struck by the quality of the staff here at St. Columba's. I accept completely that in lots of other schools here in Ireland there are remarkable men and women teaching. I've met a good few of them. However, you ask me what strikes me,
yes,
right, when I come back here in my memory, and it is of very, very fine men and women who work very, very hard and teach very well. And among them, I'm blessed to have some extraordinarily good friends, not least yourself.
As a final question, Ninian, is what you've just described the way you're happy to have spent your life?
Yes. I have had quite an opportunity in the last year and a half to think about that, and I constantly celebrate my good fortune that I spent my working life as a teacher, schoolmaster, and that I spent it in St. Columba's. I feel that I was blessed with loving history, loving the teaching of history, enjoying housemastering so much, and also blessed that I've always loved St. Columba's.
Thanks very much, and many happy years of retirement. I'll be joining you soon. Good.